Welcome back to another episode of the Managing with Mind and Heart podcast, folks. And boy, do we have an exciting show for you today. This sounds like a stupid question.
Probably is, because, yeah, go ahead. Skilled managers equals high morale, which equals all that cool stuff that you cannot pay for and you can't punish for.
When you close off that feedback channel, you are not going to be able to hear the truth.
In the first microseconds, your brain can't tell the difference between physical danger and what we call social danger.
I'm pissed off at you.
Me, specifically?
Well, just because you're my boss and all.
Employees tend to get promoted until they reach their level of incompetence. Go forward and don't suck.
We've been waiting for this day for a long time, where Mike Nash goes out of town. In fact, he's backpacking in the mountains with no access to the internet right now. And we get to take over the studio, and we get to talk crap about him the whole time, and he won't even get to see this show until it's already been released, and he's going to be so pissed. And so with me in this commandeering of the show today is a guest we've had on before, Mr. Andy Thompson. Hey, Andy.
Hey,
welcome.
I feel honored that you chose me as like the number one person to talk crap about Mike.
Yeah.
I feel very special.
Well, you know, I just, from my experience with you, you're really good at talking crap to Mike. So I just thought, this is a great opportunity. So, Andy, do you want to take the first jab at him, or do you want me to start? What feels right to you?
No, family first. Go for it.
Okay. Let me think here. Well,
too many things to choose from.
Too many things to choose from. So, Mike, Dad, as I call you, you have this one shirt, just this one shirt in your wardrobe that I really don't like. Just one, and I really don't like it. But I'm not going to tell you what shirt that is, because I'm just going to make you super paranoid every time you go to your wardrobe to pick out your outfit for the day. You're just going to be constantly be like, what is the shirt? What shirt is it? But I'm not going to tell you. So there.
You're really hanging your hat on the idea that he cares what you think.
That's the funny part. He doesn't. So
I feel like he will about this, though. This is like the one thing. Like in general, I feel like you could say whatever, but because you picked a shirt, like that's legit. I think that'll do it.
Yeah, and he has so many eclectic, we'll say that, shirts, so he just won't know. You don't have to take a jab at him if you feel like the time's right throughout the show. Go for it. But folks, this is actually not an episode for us just to roast Mike the whole time. I promise. But again, he's on vacation, and we needed another podcast, and I have been listening to a really cool podcast lately, which is actually the reason why I brought Andy on the show. Andy and his terrific partner in crime, Leah, aka your wife, they have a podcast together. I have to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, this is an awesome show. It's hilarious. The dynamic between Andy and Leah is just terrific. And I honestly think that Andy and Leah is one of the greatest duos of all time. Greater than Bonnie and Clyde, maybe greater than J and B, greater than Ernie and Bert. So, Andy, tell me a little bit about the show and where did it come from and what's kind of the premise of the show?
Yeah, so I've had kind of just a long-standing interest in creating good content. And in my world of kind of marriage and family therapy, in my world working with you guys at Nash Consulting, there's just so many good ideas that I get to kind of be immersed in day in and day out just because of the nature of the profession that I'm in. And there's so much crap on the internet, like you can go and you can find really crappy information and articles that just are not that helpful. And there's lots of terrible ideas that are out there about how to be, mentally healthy, how to manage your feelings. What do you do with those? And I just thought, it would be fun and meaningful just to try to put together some really, really good content to put out in the world. And just trying to be part of the balance of bringing good information to people. So really, really what Thought Honey is about is it's about good ideas. It's about helpful ideas that impact the important parts of your life. Things like relationships, your mental health. What do you do with your feelings? All of that stuff.
And I've learned a lot from the show. I think I haven't listened to all the episodes yet. I think, 4 or 5 of them or so. I'm learning a lot and just kind of reevaluating the way I show up in the relationships in my life, whether that's my personal relationships, work relationships, as well as just kind of evaluating, my self-talk and how do I continue on a path of self-growth and development and getting myself healthy, and why that matters for the people that I love, that I continue to have one eye on growth and development. Something we talk a lot about on this show. So, hey, before we get any further, I actually want to play just a quick clip from the show. Again, the show is Thought Honey, and I will link to everything in the show notes. But here is one of my favorite parts of the show.
So one of the underlying principles here is that when we expand our capacity for self-compassion and to be kind to ourselves, we're also expanding our capacity to feel empathy and to show kindness and compassion to other people. And here's the way to really shift your perspective on this. Let's say that your friend or a family member, someone that you really like and really care about, let's say they made a big mistake, right? Are you going to say, geez, well, you're trash. You really suck. I can't believe you did that. Think about how you would talk to someone that you actually like and care about, and then talk that way to yourself when it comes to, again, making mistakes, falling short, underperforming, all of those things.
Right. Talk to yourself like you like yourself.
So there it is. There's a quick clip from the show. I know it's just a little teaser there, but kind of gives you an idea for a little bit of what they do and what they cover in this show. I think it's a great show, Andy. You've done a great job, you and Leah.
Hey, thank you. And thanks for playing that. I hope you all enjoyed it.
I think it is just great information. It's enough to talk about some of the things that you've covered in the show. And that's what I want to do here today. There's 3 episodes in particular that I've listened to recently, and I just want to talk about some of the things that you talked about in that show and get some of the insights that came from that. I got to say, though, when I was listening to the show, I couldn't help but think about how so many of the topics you cover relate directly to leading teams and leading other people and working in kind of a group dynamics in the workplace. I can't help myself, right? I was raised under a management consultant. I've coached athletic teams for a year. I study organizational performance currently. So it's just kind of how my brain works. So that's how this has been filtered through me. I really think when you manage other people, or if you get managed by someone, you are in a relationship with that person, right? And the weird thing is you didn't necessarily choose to be in this relationship with that person, unlike your romantic relationship, say, or your friends. You didn't choose to be in this relationship. You didn't necessarily choose to spend most of your waking hours working with this person, and your success kind of depends on each other as well. So it's a very interesting dynamic.
Yeah, like you didn't get to date your boss and be like, do I really want this person or do I not?
And I know that your podcast isn't just about relationships, but everything you talk about, as far as I can tell, relates to how you show up in relationships. What do you think about that? Do you think that's true?
Yeah, I mean, I would say the core of me professionally and personally, really, is that human beings just, we're not good in isolation. We're meant to be in relationship to other people. It's just built in. It's built into how our brains are wired. It's built into how our bodies work. So all of the things we talk about that are related to, mental health, emotional intelligence, managing your emotions, families, all of that, it's really all about how can I manage myself and be in a healthy place so that I can show up positively in relationships and get the most out of those. The relationships we have are just, they're so important. I could go on and on about that topic and why I believe that, but that's kind of the premise, is that relationships matter. How can we be in a good place to be good to each other?
Yes. Yeah. And I love it. And it just seems to me that the relationship skills and the behaviors you discuss on your podcast and just the general well-being concepts. Those have implications for workplace relationships as well. So what I want to do here is talk about a few of your episodes.
Do it.
Cool. The first one that I want to talk about is episode number 5, which is the 4 critical questions. Tell me about the kind of the main subject here. What are these 4 critical questions, and how are you applying them?
Yeah, so first of all, just to tell you where these come from, these are the 4 critical questions that Maya Angelou suggests we're all asking constantly about all of our relationships. Maybe not consciously, but kind of underneath the surface. If you don't know who she was an American author, poet, writer, and so on. Look her up. There are tons of good stuff from her. Essentially, what she suggests here is that there are 4 questions that we're constantly asking about all of our relationships, right? And the first one is, do you see me? The second one, do you care that I'm here? The third one, am I enough for you, or do you need me to be better in some way? And the fourth one, can I tell that I'm special to you by the way you look at me? I mean, the best way to start thinking about this is to think about the parent-child relationship, right? And think of these questions in that context. And it doesn't take much to see that kids are constantly looking at these things with their parents, right? Do you see me? And when kids don't feel seen, what do? They act out, they misbehave, right? And then you start paying attention to them, and we reward bad behavior and kind of lock it in, right? Do you care that I'm here? This is where, okay, maybe you see me, but how do you feel about me being here? Do you seem like you like me? Do you seem like you like me being around? Do I seem like a hindrance or a nuisance, right? And you see how kids respond to that vibe that they get from their parents. Am I good enough for you? Do you need me to be better in some way? It's this idea that, of course, everybody could be better in some way, but it feels really crappy if all the time I feel like I need to be better for this person. I need to be better. I need to be better. We have to balance being good enough with also trying to improve and be a better person. And then this last one, I don't think this one's had really sunk in for me until the last couple of years. I didn't understand why this made the cut for the 4 questions. It didn't seem like that big of a deal. But can I tell that I'm special to you by the way that you look at me? And that sounds super squishy and touchy-feely, but I want to expand this just a little bit for you. It's the power of a look. It's the power of your nonverbal communications. And have you ever just gotten that gut feeling or that vibe that someone does or doesn't like you?
Yeah.
Right? And you can't put your finger on it. It's not something they said. It's just kind of coming from how am I interpreting your nonverbals? And the way that you look at people and the way you act towards people nonverbally is really telling of how do I feel about this person, right? How am I going to treat this person? And so I know that all sounds super touchy-feely and you're like, don't even go to the workplace with this, but I'm going to.
Please.
It totally shows up, right? Do you see me? Right? Think about how employees need to know that their work is being recognized and it's being noticed and that it matters. I mean, we know that employees that don't feel appreciated don't stick around.
Absolutely,
right?
yeah.
They don't do their best work. It's important that employees feel seen. And part of this is, it's especially true when we talk about the power differential. It's important that you're seen by the people whose opinion of you matters the most, because like you said earlier, Ethan, a manager has a lot of power in a person's life. They have a lot of ability to kind of promote that person, not to like a higher level to a higher position, but to promote their success.
Yeah.
Promote a good reputation for them, right? All of those things. Do you care that I'm here? Same thing. Are you glad that I'm here? Does it matter? Am I just a cog in the machine, or do you like that I'm here in this space? I mean, those two things show up. I don't think there's an argument against it, that those two things show up in the workplace all the time.
I think you're totally right with that. I mean, these 4 questions, like you said, I think they could be interpreted as this touchy-feely thing that maybe only applies to romantic relationships or relationships with your kids. But really what I think that is being demonstrated with these 4 questions is basic human psychology about how we feel safe and feel connected to somebody else. And like I said earlier, this work relationship that you have with someone can either be really great, right? It can be based on, hey, I know this person cares about me. I know they have my best interest in heart. Therefore, I can go to work every day feeling secure and do my best work. Or say that you feel like your manager doesn't really see you, right? They don't see you doing good work. They're not really noticing you. And you got the feeling they don't actually care about you. Maybe you're just kind of this cog in the machine for them, right? Or your work is really just not enough for them. It's never enough. Or you just get this ultimate vibe, by being around them that, you're not really anybody special to them in your life, right? Again, we spend most of our waking hours in the workplace if for a lot of people. And it can be a really miserable time if the person that kind of has power over you, again, we've talked about the power differential in this show. Go back and listen to that episode. But if that person that has power over you and you get the feeling that they just don't see you as a person and don't care about you, you're not going to bring your best self. You really aren't.
Yeah, those first two questions are a little easier to see in the workplace. When we get to the second two questions, I mean, this is where I think people might say, well, those are no longer applicable, but they really, really are. I mean, am I enough for you, or do you need me to be better in some way? This is not about could you improve. Everybody could grow and improve. This is about, is what I bring to the table as a human being, like, is that good enough? Or am I not a good enough person? It's on a different level than just could I improve or could my performance be better? And this last one is it's so squishy that I'm actually going to say a couple of things about this. That can I tell that I'm special to you by the way you look at me? First of all, this is not an invitation to be creepy. Don't go around like looking at people trying to make them think they're special, just, staring them down or whatever.
Right.
Like you could get in real trouble with that.
Don't break eye contact. Whatever you do, don't break eye contact.
Easy with the creepy smiles. Yeah. But the way I want you to read that is, what information do people get from me from my nonverbals? Mm-hmm. Is it positive? Is it negative? Is it accepting? Is it critical? Mm-hmm. Right? And something, for example, for me, I'm not particularly demonstrative. And what people get from my nonverbals is, I don't know what the hell Andy's thinking. And they fill in that blank with negative things, even though none of those things are probably true, And so I have to kind of go out of my way to make sure people know where I'm coming from, because otherwise they're probably not going to get something good. It's just acknowledging the impact of your nonverbals. And all of that absolutely shows up in relationships in the workplace.
And again, I just keep relating this to what we talk about in those top 15 management skills, right? This first question, do you see me? That could be giving recognition and praise for good work, right? Skill number 10, give recognition and thanks, right? Of the top 15 management skills, right? Caring about someone could be through getting them the materials they need to do their job successfully. I care about you. Let me get you the tools that you need, which is number 1 on the top 15 management skills. Show caring and respect. Or number 15 of the top 50 management skills, provide resources and training. So I think these 4 questions do a really great job of kind of condensing what we know about building trust, respect, and connection in all aspects of your relationship. Last thing I'm going to say on this, bit off topic, as I was listening to this episode, I was sitting here in my office. I actually have my sister's dog with me for the week, sweet little Carmen over here. I couldn't help but think, I think there's a reason why we love dogs so much as human beings and we grow so attached to them. A dog answers all 4 of these questions with a huge yes, right? The way they look at you, they see you, they obviously care about you, you're enough for the dog. I know that doesn't really relate to what we're talking about here, but it does relate to just the psychology of what human beings need at a very basic and raw level.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I hadn't really thought about it in that context, but it's such a big deal. I always start talking about kind of the parent-child relationship with this, but as you expand it to friends, workplace, pets, all of that. The one that I really like to land on is a spouse, or if you're in a long-term committed relationship. Like, it's so powerful to think about these questions and to ask yourself, okay, my partner's asking these questions about me all the time. What answers do I think they're getting? Mm-hmm. And it's a really great way to look at yourself and say, how can I be better for this other person that's really important to me? And essentially, learn from your pets, learn from the dog, because they've got it down.
They do. They absolutely do. Anything more you want to say on this one before we move on to a different subject?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, actually, hold on. I take that back. If you want really good insight into yourself or into somebody else when you're having a disagreement with them, or when you're talking about something that, like when you're fighting with your spouse, for example, ask yourself which one of these questions is not being answered yes right now for me or for them. And that actually gives you really good direction to resolve things. That was one little powerful trick that can help you get to the bottom of an argument that's hard to define what it's about and why I'm feeling so hurt, or, why it's not working. Yeah.
And I'm sure you can relate to this from your therapy practice as well as your practice coaching other leaders. It's a framework. This really is a framework, and having a helpful framework to work out interpersonal issues and look for interpersonal opportunities is really helpful, rather than the kind of willy-nilly, is this going good? Yes or no? But without being able to look at it through a specific lens to figure out where might we be missing something here, and where are we doing really good work at.
Yeah. I could talk about this all day. We can move on.
Me too.
Maybe this is what it feels like to be Mike all the time, is I could talk about this all day.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right with that one. Yeah. So I want to talk about another episode that it relates to this last one. Your episode number 8 is Trust and Leading with Vulnerability. Fascinating episode. I've thought a lot about vulnerability lately. It's definitely a big topic of conversation in our work with Nash Consulting, right? Trust-based vulnerability is something we train folks on. But tell me about this one. First off, what does leading with vulnerability mean in the context that you discuss it?
Yeah, so it sounds like it's about leadership, and it kind of is, because it's important for leaders to do. But when I say leading with vulnerability, it's kind of in the context of, well, yeah, you should have led with that, right? This is the thing that should go first. And so really the context is trust. And so to give you a little bit of context here, one of the things that I run into pretty constantly, whether it's couples therapy, whether it's individual therapy, whether it's organizational development work, it doesn't matter where I am. If we're talking about trust, there's this place that people get stuck where they don't want to lean into something, or they don't want to take a risk because they want to guarantee that it's going to be safe before they lean into it. And I think it's important that we're not making, crazy decisions to lean into things that are obviously not safe. I'm not saying just lean into anything and hope it goes well. That would be stupid, frankly.
Right. What do you mean by safe, though? Safe can be taken a lot of ways here.
The word I would actually focus on more is guarantee. It's like the safety is, I want to know that it's going to go well, or I want to know that I'm not going to get burned here. I want to know that I'm not going to get hurt, right? That's safety. The problem is that we want the guarantee, and we can't, because it usually involves another person, and we know that we can't control other people. And so what I want, for example, is, let's say there's a rift in my marriage, right? And things are not going so well, and my spouse and I are trying to work it out. They're doing lots of things to try to build trust with me. But for me to lean back into that person after we've kind of drifted apart, I don't have a guarantee that they're going to continue to work on it. I don't have a guarantee that they're going to respond well. I don't have a guarantee that I'm not going to get hurt again, right? And that's hard. It's super hard. And so I kind of the conundrum or the situation we're in is I need to lean into something. I need to take action. I need to take a risk, right? And risk just meaning I don't know how it's going to go. There's no guarantee, right? And I don't know for sure that it's going to go well. And the only thing that really fills that gap of not having a guarantee of safety, whatever that means, is trust, right? Trust for me is, it's hard to define, but one of the ways you could define trust would be it's the thing that fills in the gap between kind of what we can't control and believing that it's going to go okay anyway, right? So if I trust someone, I can't control them. I can't guarantee that they're going to treat me well or that they're not going to hurt me. But if I trust them, it means I can lean into that relationship and I can rely on that person believing that it's going to be okay. That's what trust is.
Right.
And so what trust is really built on is it's 1,000 little moments where you leaned in and you didn't get burned, right? And it doesn't mean it has to be perfect, but it's most of the time, if I lean in, it went okay. That's what I need to build trust.
And so that's the vulnerability piece you're talking about is leaning in and revealing something about you or showing your weaknesses and trusting that they're going to take that and they're not going to abuse that.
Yeah, relying on a person, where if they don't follow through, it's going to mean, negative consequences for you. It can be whatever. And the thing is when it comes to building trust, the only way to do it is if we practice vulnerability and we lean in and then get some data, right, based on how that goes that tells us, is this going to be safe or not? And so where we're stuck is I want it to be safe before I lean in, but I can't build trust that tells me it's safe without leaning in and seeing how it goes. And so we're kind of on the precipice where, we can either stay kind of self-protect and stay where we are and not lean into that relationship, or not take action, or not take a risk, which sometimes is the right choice if it just doesn't feel safe enough. But we have to recognize that there's no guarantee of safety. And it's this ability to lean into that vulnerability and to lead with vulnerability so that opportunities to build trust can actually exist, right? So that next time it doesn't feel so vulnerable because we've got some trust built based on actual history, right?
Right. And, here I go again with relating it back to management, but I want to ask you, Andy, how can managers, people that are responsible for leading other people, right? How can they use this concept of vulnerability-based trust, if you will, to better manage people and lead people? Because I'll tell you what, as someone that has been in management roles, my gut instinct is often to don't show weakness, right? Don't open up about the parts that I'm struggling with. Don't let my team know that, man, I am really struggling here, and I'm just having a hard time with something, right? That, for some reason, that's my intuition, is to just be this really strong character. So do you think that is the wrong approach for managers, that they should be opening up and being vulnerable if they want to build that trust with their team? Or what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it's important because on the one hand, as a manager, people are kind of counting on you to keep it together. Like if things are going really badly, you kind of need to be the person to lead people through it. I mean, that's part of being a leader. But at the same time, people, I for the life of me cannot remember who said this, but you don't trust people that don't have problems. Right? If you don't have any problems, I don't trust you. Right? It just because there's something you're hiding, right?
They're not being authentic, and I think people can see right through that. Like our best theory of mind knows that human beings have struggles, and by you not showing me those struggles, it's like I'm not getting the real you. And when you're not getting the real you from someone, do you actually trust that person? I don't think so.
Yeah, nobody likes to feel like they're a burden. And so if I go to you and I've got a problem, but it just feels like you don't have any, it's like, I don't want to go and be messy in front of you if I just think you're super put together and perfect, At the same time, I think what managers need to balance is, no, you don't need to dump all of your problems on your employees. You don't need to constantly remind them, I've got a lot going on too.
Right. It's definitely a balance.
But they do need to know that you're a real person, because if they've never heard of a time or seen a time where you made a mistake, they're not going to want to come to you and say, I made a mistake, right? They kind of have to see you as being human. I mean, this is how you get on their level in a non-condescending way, is it's instead of it being, I'm the boss and I'm higher up than you. It's like, we're in different roles. I'm leading this team through these things, but I'm just as human as you are. I make mistakes. I don't get it right all the time, and so on. I think managers need to share enough that people know that they're a real person, right? Without dumping their problems on their people.
Yeah, Brene Brown, I'm sure many people listening are familiar with that name. I know we've talked about her on the podcast. We talk about her in our work. She's done outstanding work on the topic of vulnerability. Her research career, a lot of it is based around vulnerability and vulnerability-based trust. And I remember listening to, I think, one of her podcasts talking about vulnerability in relationships, and her explaining that it is kind of this give and take relationship, right? What I mean by that is, by me going to you, Andy, revealing something vulnerable about myself. Hey, I'm really struggling here. My relationships with my clients, they're not what I want it to be. I think I've messed up in a lot of ways, the way I've handled the customers, and it hurts. All right, it hurts, and it's really getting to me, right? Now, I've revealed something about myself. I've been vulnerable. Now, where the trust gets built is by you coming back to me and saying, in however way you say it, thank you. And I'm glad you revealed that about me. And by the way, here's something that I'm struggling with too, right? And we all struggle. Okay, now you kind of have this relationship where you've both revealed something and it's vulnerable. And as a leader, I think it's important that you take that first step of being vulnerable and letting your folks know this is okay. And I struggle. And now you've opened up that channel of, well, for lack of better terms, vulnerability, where they know they can also be human and talk about their struggles. And that's, I think, where trust really gets cemented.
Yeah. I think when we think about vulnerability, the first thing that most of us jump to, myself included, is self-disclosure, right? It's sharing things about yourself, sharing your feelings, sharing things that have happened to you, sharing your struggles. Vulnerability is actually a pretty big bucket, and there's a lot of things that go into it. And so as a manager, here's another example of where you might lead with vulnerability, right? Where I don't know if this is going to go well, but I need to create an opportunity for this person to build trust with me by leaning into this, even though I don't have a guarantee that it's going to go well. Think about control. Think about, okay, I'm not going to micromanage this project with this employee. I'm going to step back and let go a little bit and know that if they screw it up, it's going to reflect on me, right? There's vulnerability in letting go of control. There's vulnerability in giving people autonomy and kind of not holding on so tight, because if it doesn't go well, it does reflect poorly on you, right?
Yeah, you're technically exposing yourself to risk, and you're taking that risk.
Yeah. And you're letting go of control as you do it. Right?
Yeah.
You're kind of putting your image in this other person's hands in a way, right? But as a manager, when it comes to control and autonomy, of course, it's so important for employees to feel like you trust that they've got it, right? That you're not constantly saying, well, remember to do this and remember to do that. Like you just are assuming they're going to forget. And if they haven't built that trust where they have burned you a few times, then that's a conversation that you have and it's something you work on, but you have no guarantee that this person is going to follow through. You're kind of putting yourself out there. And so really that's what I mean. Anytime I say leading with vulnerability, it's just that you have to take that first leap into something vulnerable. Otherwise, there's no opportunity for the other person to follow through and actually build trust between you, right? And whether that's self-disclosure, whether that's giving up some control, whatever it is, I think that's important that we're willing to lean in without a guarantee.
Yeah, that really resonates with me. There's one of my favorite books. I've probably talked about on this podcast here, so I'm sure I'm just sounding like a broken record. But The Culture Code by Daniel Coyle. It's a pretty quick read, pretty easy read, and really it touches on so much wisdom when it comes to building a healthy culture with teams. There was a section in there where they're talking about vulnerability on teams. Dr. Jeff Pulzer, I believe his name is, he's a professional of organizational behavior at Harvard, has spent a large chunk of his career kind of examining how small social exchanges can create just this cascade of effects in groups. There's this quote here from him that I thought just perfectly sums up how vulnerability affects groups. And he says, people tend to think of vulnerability in this touchy-feely way, but that's not what's happening. It's about sending a really clear signal that you have weaknesses, that you could use help. And if that behavior becomes a model for others, then you can set the insecurities aside and get to work and start to trust each other and help each other. Right? And if you never have that vulnerable moment, on the other hand, then people will try to cover up their weaknesses. And every little micro task becomes a place where insecurities manifest themselves. And I'll shut up here in a second, but I love you, Jeff Pulzer. Great stuff here. But so Pulzer also points out that vulnerability is less about the sender than the receiver, which is kind of what I was talking about earlier. He says the second person is key. Do they pick it up and reveal their own weaknesses, or do they cover up and pretend that they don't have any? And it makes a huge difference in the outcome.
Yeah, and I love that. That was so well said. Kind of this idea that you have to model vulnerability. Mm-hmm. And you're right. The receiver. How do I respond to the vulnerable thing that you just did? Do you recognize other people's vulnerability? Is the first thing. Like, do you know when it's happening? because I've seen this happen where a person will say something where there's some vulnerability to it. It was hard for them to say, it was hard for them to share, that say they needed help or that they didn't know the answer or, whatever it was. I've seen a room full of people completely miss a vulnerable moment. Like they just didn't recognize it for what it was. And I'm sitting here and I'm looking and there's this person that's like, I'm pretty sure if I say, wait, hold on, say more about that they're probably going to cry. Like they're on the verge of tears.
Right.
And we miss it so much. I've probably missed that a number of times.
Yeah, we all do.
And so recognizing when it's a vulnerable moment for someone and then being the kind of second person that encourages that and says that's okay.
Yeah.
And sometimes that means sharing something about yourself. Sometimes that just means empathy. Sometimes that means support. Sometimes that means just listening. I mean, there's lots of great ways to respond, but it's a matter of, do I respond in a way that makes it feel like, hey, it was okay that you just did that?
Yeah. Again, I just think that, and research will point out that when this becomes kind of just a norm for a group, people are vulnerable, people show their true selves, the group will get out of this kind of self-protection mode and they're able to kind of put all these, in a lot of ways, insecurities aside or fears aside and just get to work, right? Because that there's trust built into this group now and we can actually just stop protecting ourselves and get really good work done.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Andy, we have just a few minutes here, but I think we have time to touch on one more of your episodes. This one, I think so far was my favorite. They're all real good, but this one, I don't know. It just resonated with me the most. And this is episode 11. And the title of the episode is Cognitive Behavioral Therapy, CBT, and Cognitive Distortions. It was really interesting when you described cognitive behavioral therapy, right? CBT. And you and Leah made the point, you were talking about how we talk to ourselves all the time. There's a voice in our head, and it's often, for most of us, I would say, kind of this constantly chattering voice in our head. As some of the listeners know, I've done a lot of training in mindfulness, and I've done mindfulness-based stress reduction training, which is actually based on Aaron Beck's cognitive behavioral therapy. And the more that I've trained in meditation and mindfulness, the more I realize just how crazy this voice in my head is. Like this voice in my head is actually kind of a jerk, right? And the more I train in it, the more I realize like this voice isn't necessarily me, if you will, right? It's kind of just a chatter, and I can kind of cut through it in certain ways. So I found the discussion you had on cognitive behavioral therapy really interesting. But what was kind of the premise of this episode with talking about cognitive behavioral therapy and how we can apply it to our own lives?
Yeah, I think the first thing that we were trying to do, and we'll do this with more episodes, as we go, is it's just to take different modalities of therapy. I mean, there's different ways to do therapy, different approaches, and just to highlight those because different things work for different people. And it's just to shed some light on, what does it mean when you hear cognitive behavioral therapy? It just sounds so jargony. Yeah. And so we just kind of wanted to give people a snapshot of, what's the lens a person is looking through if they're using this kind of therapy with their clients, right? So that was kind of the starting point. And then from there, it was just to kind of highlight what is, just from my personal opinion anyway, what I really like about it and what I think works really well. And what are some of the things where I think maybe it misses a little bit. Every modality of therapy has its pros and cons, and it matters way more your relationship with your therapist than the modality they use. But this was just kind of my thoughts on the matter. What's really valuable that we can take away from this and so on.
Sure. So what exactly is cognitive behavioral therapy? I didn't give a great summary of it.
Yeah. So if you look at human beings, we've got our thoughts, we've got our actions, we've got our emotions, and then we have also kind of our beliefs, kind of our deep-seated, this is what I think about the world, about life, about myself, and so on. And cognitive behavioral therapy kind of recognizes that it's hard to change beliefs and feelings directly, like to just go say, hey, you believe this thing, stop believing it, right? Like you believe you're not a good person. Well, just believe that you're a good person. And it's like, that doesn't really work. Right. It's hard to change beliefs. It's hard to change feelings. And so what cognitive behavioral therapy looks at is how can we influence our feelings and beliefs over time by intervening at kind of the level of thinking or the level of behaving. So it's kind of a practical way of what behaviors can I engage in, and how can I intervene in my own self-talk to eventually get to a healthier place with my feelings and my beliefs. It makes a bit of an assumption that our feelings are not 100%, but there's a lot of causal effect of, my thoughts create my feelings. Mm-hmm. That's one of the points where I'm not quite sure about, where I fall on that one. Mm-hmm. But it's the idea that my thoughts can certainly influence my feelings. And there's a lot of research behind it. There's a lot of research that says CBT is effective, especially with things like depression and anxiety. And so we do a lot of work around people's thoughts.
Yeah. Speaking of vulnerability, I want to tell you something. I for a long, long time have struggled with I've struggled with this kind of voice in my head, if you will, that's telling me I'm not doing enough, right? I'm not doing enough in my job. I'm not doing enough in my career. I'm not doing enough in a relationship. Like, there's always more I could be doing. And I kind of have this nagging feeling of, well, gosh, should I be doing more? And it can be tough. It can be anxiety producing. In your show, you talked about, I believe, one of the tools that therapists will give in cognitive behavioral therapy, which is kind of a journaling exercise. I've heard of that exercise before, and I've applied it to my own life. Tell me a little bit about that journaling exercise. I just think that for all the other human beings out there that might be listening to this show, this could be a really helpful tool when you're dealing with situations like I'm dealing with, where it's kind of negative self-talk that can be pretty handcuffing in some ways in my life.
Yeah. So the first thing would be to get a little familiar with cognitive distortions, right? That's going to be our framework. Mm-hmm. And so what cognitive distortions are is basically the messed up patterns of thinking that we all have that are not necessarily reflective of reality. So for example, overgeneralizing is a cognitive distortion where I had one bad experience. Let's say I was dating this person. The relationship didn't go well at all. It ended really badly. It was messy. I emotionally was really hurt by it. And so every relationship after that, I'm just assuming that it's going to end badly, right? Because that one did. So I'm kind of taking one experience and I'm projecting that onto all my future experiences that look similar to that one. And the reality is that, that was just one experience. It doesn't mean all my other experiences are going to follow, but your brain is telling you this is going to end badly. It's not going to work. We end up self-sabotaging as a result and so on, right?
Yeah.
So recognizing that, hey, overgeneralization is kind of a messed up pattern of thinking that all of us deal with at some point, and being able to recognize that in yourself, that's kind of the start, is knowing your cognitive distortions. There's a whole bunch of others. Google will bring you lists upon lists of what these look like and descriptions and so on. And so what you'll do with this journaling exercise is you'll get familiar with these cognitive distortions. And then whenever you catch yourself kind of having one of these negative thoughts, this negative self-talk, right? Then what you're going to do is you're going to write down, okay, here's what the thought is. Here's what my inner dialogue is around this. This part is optional, but I find it helpful. You can rate the intensity of the thought. So just scale of 1 to 10. 10 is this is really bothering me and ruining my day. 1 is, well, I just barely noticed it, right? Not a big deal, but it's a little negative or uncomfortable. So you write down the thought, you rate it, and then you write down a replacement thought that more accurately reflects reality. I mean, and this is actually another cognitive distortion in and of itself, where you take your feelings and you assume that, well, if I feel it, it must be true.
Right.
So for example, I feel like a crappy person, therefore I must be a crappy person.
Right.
Like, well, that's
emotional reasoning. Is that the one you're talking about?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so what you're going to do is you're going to write down a more accurate replacement for that. So let's say that I make a mistake and my inner dialogue is, I feel like an idiot. Let's say this is level 5. So I write down.
How about this, Andy? I'm using this as a free therapy session for myself. So,
Oh, are we going to use you for this?
Yeah.
Yeah, let's do it.
Like I said, something I'm struggling with and have struggled with for a while is not feeling like I'm doing enough. Part of me recognizes that's not true. I do a lot. I would consider myself, I'm not tooting my own horn here, but I consider myself a highly productive person. Yet I feel like I'm not doing enough. So how could you apply this journal exercise to that?
Sure. So is the thought is I'm not doing enough?
The thought is I am not doing enough. There's more I could be doing that I should be doing.
Okay. So based on kind of your knowledge of cognitive distortions, can you pick out one that fits?
Well, I think this is one of the ones you touched on in this episode, which is the shoulding, the shooting all over yourself, as you put it, right?
Yeah. So, and how would you rate it? 1 to 10? How intense is this?
Yeah. So it's going to vary at different times. I would say on average, it can be up there at a 4 or a 5, where it's definitely not just kind of this low level thing that's bugging me, and it's definitely like huge, like a 10, but it's like, this is upsetting me, and this is causing me to, have negative emotions because I'm feeling like I'm not doing enough.
Okay. So I'm not doing enough. I should be doing more. Right? All of this, level 5, you've kind of identified what are we working with here. And then what are some things that you can think of that maybe reflect reality a little more accurately? Like the I'm not doing enough. What are your actual metrics for whether or not you're doing enough?
That's a really good point. It's all subjective and it's day by day. But if I were to write down, the reality of the situation, let's take the other day, for instance, I was feeling this way. I might have been at a level 4 or something. Reflecting on it, I realized, okay, I was up at 6 a.m. I studied for my master's program till like 10. That's like 4 hours of studying. And then from like 10:30 till 4:30, I worked on business. And then I got a workout in. And then by that time it was 7:30 and I was still kind of feeling like, did I do enough? There's probably more I should do. But the reality is, I did a lot that day.
Yeah. So that would be an example of looking back and saying, okay, well, here's what I did. And that was a lot. I mean, I don't see where I could have actually done any more in that time period. Maybe I'm doing better than I think I am.
Right.
Right. And you kind of write down this alternative way to look at that. And it's not like it's magic where you just do that and then you adopt this new thought and your feelings change and, everything's good. It's really more of a pattern or a process of changing your automatic thinking, where instead of just letting your thoughts kind of run away with you and assuming that all the crappy things you think about yourself are true or about your life are true, it's to practice checking in and not letting those thoughts turn into negative feelings that aren't necessarily based in reality, but instead to recognize what's a more accurate picture of what's going on here, so that we don't have to kind of be the victim of our own inner critic.
Yeah. No, I think this is a super helpful tool. Again, it's something I've applied to my own life. And I think you hit on a really key point there. This isn't some, panacea. Like it doesn't just automatically fix, your cognitive distortions, but I have just the process of stopping and thinking to myself, all right, am I looking at this through a lens of reality? Or is it just my brain being kind of a jerk to me and saying, do more, right? And so, no, I think this is a really helpful tool. And I want to talk about one of the other cognitive distortions that you talked about in this episode 11, emotional reasoning. Talk to me about that. Talk to me a little more about emotional reasoning and what that looks like.
Yeah, there's a balance we have to strike with this. Or maybe it's not a balance so much as it is there's two things we have to do. One is, yes, absolutely. We can't just believe that all of our feelings reflect reality in the sense that, if I feel like you're out to get me, that doesn't necessarily mean you're out to get me. Right. And I think one of our big problems here is that we use the words I feel, and then we fill in the rest with our suspicions or our assumptions or our opinions.
Yeah.
And we don't actually talk about our feelings. Instead of saying, well, I'm afraid or I'm worried, we say, I feel like you don't care about me. Right. And what I should be saying is, hey, I'm afraid that you don't care about me. I'm worried. I worry sometimes that you don't care about me. It sounds very different. And so what I think we have to be careful about is, yes, first of all, not doing the emotional reasoning thing and just letting our feelings dictate reality constantly. But we can't do that at the expense of ignoring our feelings. Like we can't just, like, feelings still matter. They are what they are. Like, even if I am worried, I feel worried that you don't care about me, and you say, no, I do care about you, I might still have that feeling, and that feeling is still going to impact me. It's still true, that I'm worried or afraid that you don't care about me, right? And that still has to be dealt with. We can't just discredit it and then it goes away. And what we have to be careful about is that we don't just bury feelings and lean so far the direction of kind of reason and, logic that we don't give credit to people's feelings, because the reality is we're emotional beings. We have feelings, and whether or not they're rational doesn't change whether or not we have them. Even if my feeling doesn't reflect reality, I might still have some emotional need that's not being met. I might have some emotional pain that hasn't been resolved. And people walking around without dealing with their feelings is one of the most dangerous things that I can think of for a society, is people that won't deal with their feelings.
Yeah.
And so while we have to be aware of this and recognize it, we also have to not demonize the legitimacy of feelings. And we have to make sure that we still are accepting that people's feelings are real. And if you feel this way, that matters and that's important. It just doesn't have to mean that because you feel that way, that means that thing is truth. We can do both of those things.
Yeah, that's a really important distinction. I think you can go too far in either direction. You can go too far in the direction of always trust your feelings, right? Whatever comes up with your feelings, that's true, and something needs to definitely be taken care of in that situation, right? But then too far in the other direction is don't pay any attention to emotions, because there's nothing you can get from them, and you just have to look at things through a logical standpoint. It's a balance there, and I think it's important that we find that balance as individuals, as a society, and certainly when you're in a management position. If you use emotional reasoning, I think that could have some negative outcomes, with the way you lead a team. And I don't know if we have a lot of time to get into that, so I'll put that as a teaser. But
yeah, there's so many things to balance, and that's really that's kind of what goes through my head is how do we navigate all the nuances? It would be nice if there were just like a be all end all, hey, do this cognitive distortions thing and that'll fix all of your emotional problems, but that's the complexity of being an emotionally intelligent person and navigating relationships, is that there's nuance and there's these things that we have to balance, and we're all just in it together trying to figure it out. I have all the same problems everybody else has. Right?
Is that true?
And I would hate for people to oh, it's totally true. I would hate for people to think that just because I talk about this stuff, and I like to think I know some things about this stuff, I tell my clients all the time, like if I'm seeing a couple, it's like I go home and I have the same problems you have. Yeah. Right. In a lot of cases. And, we're all in it together.
And that's why I like you, Andy. And that's why I know you've been so successful in both your therapy realm as well as your management consulting realm, is because you're real, right? You have such great and deep knowledge on these subjects, but you are a self-experimenter, if you will, in your own way, that you take these things and you apply it to your own life, which I really love that. I love that about you. So, hey, we are totally out of time. We were supposed to keep this a little bit shorter, but as in the Managing with Mind and Heart podcast fashion, we've gone over time, but I think it was well worth it. Andy, anything you want to say before we cut the mic?
No, I'm happy to under promise and over deliver on the time thing.
There we go. That's what we do best at.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming on. So folks, one more time, the podcast is called Thought Honey. Where can we find that, Andy?
Yeah. Spotify, Apple, CastBox. Look for it where you get your podcast normally, and you should be able to find it.
Yep. And I will link to everything in the show notes. I will link to the podcast and these 3 episodes that we talked about. Please check them out. It just might help you out in life. It sure has so far for me. Andy, since we've plugged you the whole time, I'm going to do a shameless plug for myself and for Nash Consulting. I want to encourage you all to sign up for our monthly newsletter. I like to consider it more of a publication than a newsletter, because it's not your typical newsletter that you would get. But it's just kind of articles that we write, tips, tricks for managing people, leading well, working on teams. We put a lot of time and effort into it, and we've gotten really great response so far. So sign up for the newsletter, please. You can do so by texting the word leading to 66866, and you'll be on that. And besides that, thank you for listening into the show. And Mike/Dad, I'm sorry you couldn't be a part of this one, but what are you going to do? All right, folks. We will see you all later. Oh, bye.